Greetings, geologists from the Grand Canyon South Rim. Well, the South Rim is 1,000 feet lower than the North Rim for a reason, because there is a fault that runs through the area. So let's talk a little bit about the geologic history and give you some understanding about these incredible rocks that you see behind me. All right, so a couple of facts about the Grand Canyon. It's 277 miles long, it's over a mile deep, and in some places 12 to 17 miles wide. That story is pretty recent. But the story at the bottom, where you see the gouge down there, started 1.8 billion years ago. So how did that happen? Here's the story. It's really cool. We had an island arc collide with the North American continent about 1.8 billion years ago. Not million, billion. And when that happened, it glued on or accreted on and uplifted mountains. So you might wonder, where are those mountains today? They have eroded down, and all that's left is what's at the very, very bottom of that gorge down there. Those are called the Vishnu schist. They're old, igneous and metamorphic rock that are very, very rock solid, and they're still several miles thick of that rock that we have today. So right above that layer, you start seeing different looking rocks because they're sedimentary. These sedimentary rocks are all Paleozoic in age. What does that translate into? About 545 million years ago, up until about 200 or so million years ago. So it has rock layers from the Cambrian all the way through the Permian period. So in those layers, there's stories. And here's an example. In some of the Cambrian layers is where we start seeing trilobites. And trilobites look like little roaches, but they're ocean-looking animals that were scavengers of their time. We have worm burrows. We have other sea creatures that live in these rocks like crinoids and fish. But some of these sedimentary layers aren't just about seas. Some of them are about land-derived sediments that would have been from rivers called fluvial environments. Others are in aeolian environments, which are deserts. So we have fossils of amphibians and reptiles, and we have other types of geologic structures like ripple marks and cross-bedding. So there's a rich variety of geologic history captured in these rocks. Interestingly enough, the top layer of the Grand Canyon is called the Kaibab limestone, and the Kaibab limestone is a seabed limestone that's very, very sandy. And then this sandy layer caps what I'm sitting on right now. Literally, it is the frosting of it. You can kind of see that same layer towards the very, very top of the other side. The difference is it's 1,000 feet higher. So why does it abruptly stop at the Kaibab limestone at the Permian in age? Well, that's an interesting story too, because there used to be a lot of younger rocks piled on top of the Grand Canyon. So let's talk about that story. The Colorado Plateau uplifted about 15 to 20 million years ago. And when it did, it was not uplifted in the same way the mountains in Colorado that you're familiar with as the Rockies were, but it was still part of the same kind of system. And so when the Colorado Plateau uplifted, it kind of also uplifted and tilted these rocks. When it did, rivers started to flow downhill. So about 5 to 6 million years ago, the Colorado River and other similar tributaries began carving away these rocks one wedge at a time. The way they really carved them down is by massive floods. So that brings me to the last ice age. The last ice age, there weren't glaciers here, but glaciers played a role in what happened here because we did get ice dams. And we also got lava dams. And the lava dams came from recent lava eruptions that happened in the last few million years. And water would pile up behind those and then crash open the dam. And when they do that, it would flash flood downstream and take big, big boulders with it, scouring the bedrock, causing different levels of depth and dip to the actual tributaries that is down below us, which is the Colorado River. So that's one of the reasons not every river has the same depth as the Colorado River or a mile deep gouge in the ground or as wide. So let's talk about the width of the Grand Canyon and why it varies so much. It varies based on the type of rock that's been eroded. The harder the rock, the more vertical the rock layer will be. The softer the rock, the more angled the rock bed will be because it weathers faster, so it has a higher differential weathering capacity. These rocks that make up the canyon walls that go straight up are pretty durable rocks, so that means they have a low differential weathering capacity. So we've lost the new rocks on top except what lavas we have, and those are found towards the western edge of the canyon. So everything that's happened since then happened in the last few million years, literally the last 5 to 6 million years. So to kind of capture the key elements of the Grand Canyon, it's really, really old rocks. It dates back to 1.8 billion years old. We have a series of Paleozoic strata. We're not missing, or should I say we don't have every layer in sequential order, so we're missing a few. That means we have a phenomena called unconformities. Matter of fact, we have all three kinds of unconformities here. The third thing that's really important is the canyon itself. The missing rock is young. That's called cross-cutting relationships, where we brought in a river and crossed over this material. The river, by definition, must be younger than what it cut through. Thus, the canyon that it created is younger than what it cut through. So I want to go back to that unconformity statement I made just a minute ago. The world's largest unconformity in terms of a gap of time can be witnessed right here in the Grand Canyon. If you're hiking the Bright Angel Trail, there's a place where you can actually skip over a billion years of time in one step. And here's why, because you're crossing over what's called the Great Unconformity. How did that happen? Remember those mountains I talked about that were 1.8 billion years old, that Vishnu schist? By the way, Vishnu is spelled V as in Victor, I-S-H-N-U. Vishnu schist and its similar group of rocks were big mountains, and they wore down, and as they did, they wore down over about a billion-year time frame. When sea level came in during the early Paleozoic, and we know it did because we have sea creatures down there in those rock layers, it deposited newer layers right on top of that 1.8 billion-year-old rock. So if I have about 1.8 billion-year-old rock up to about 1.2 billion-year-old rock, and then right on top of it I have 545 million-year-old rock, I'm missing a pretty big gap of time. That's where it gets its name, the Great Unconformity. Now, the Great Unconformity is not just witnessed right here in the Grand Canyon, it's witnessed all over places in the Southwest and throughout parts of North America. So this is not the only region that you're going to see that. So interestingly enough, the Great Unconformity is one of the most famous parts of the Grand Canyon, but your average tourist doesn't know a thing about it. So I want you to learn about it as being a geology person in my classes, because it's important that the Great Unconformity is witnessed. So to kind of give you a bird's eye view, that's that layer that looks really in the indention of the river there, the very base, overlain by that flat sedimentary rock. That's called the Tapete Sandstone. The Tapete Sandstone is the first Paleozoic, or what we would call modern geologic time rock layer that's laid in the Grand Canyon, and everything progressively on top of that is fairly flat, and that's because it was preserved in a canyon. Now the slight tilting I talked about, you can see that in a few places in the Grand Canyon where there's some angular unconformities. Otherwise, most of these rock layers are fairly flat. So welcome to the Grand Canyon, and I will see you at the next stop. Bye.